תודה רבה יריב, ותודה רבה לכולכם שבאתם היום. כמו שיריב אמר, אני עובר לאנגלית בשביל ההרצאה, אבל אני מבין שאדם לפשטיין ידבר בעברית, והשאלות יכולים להיות גם בעברית וגם באנגלית, ואני אנסה לעשות מה שאני יכול. I always put these little indicators at the beginning to say that I'm still using Twitter. So if you want to hear more about the William T. Grant Foundation or education in the United States, you can follow me on Twitter or follow the foundation on Twitter. Today I'm going to address three questions. The first question is, what does it take to get evidence used? Here we are at a university. We're in the business of producing evidence. But if we want the evidence to matter, then it can't just sit on the shelves of a library, it has to be used. So what does that take? The second question, what can universities do to support the production of useful evidence? Universities do a lot to support the production of evidence that is not useful. But if we want universities to support useful evidence, there are some new steps that need to be taken. And third, how do we get from here to there? So those are the three questions that I'm going to ask. In order to answer the questions, I'm going to tell you what the William T. Grant Foundation has learned through supporting research about the use of evidence from research, about structures that support evidence use, and about university structures in particular that can make a difference. So in case you have limited time, I'm going to tell you the short version of my talk now. The short version is what does not work, dissemination. What does work, engagement. So I asked Adam Lefstein how I should say this in Hebrew, in case you really only have a short time. So, מה שלא מצליח, הפצה. מה שכן מצליח, מעורבות. אבל זה יותר ממעורבות, זה להיכנס לעניין, לבנות יחסים, לבנות קשרים, לבנות אמונה. זה מה שמצליח במטרה to ensure that evidence is used. Okay, you can leave now, or you can hear the explanation. You can hear how I know that this is the case. So the William T. Grant Foundation was founded in 1936 by William T. Grant. William T. Grant owned a lot of stores in the United States. The stores went bankrupt in the 1970s, but the foundation was endowed and it's perpetual. And the foundation is committed to understanding human behavior through research, but the specific questions that the foundation pursues have changed over time depending on the prevailing issues of the day. And as Yariv hello? Maybe there's a button there. Testing. Okay. As Yariv already said, the mission of the foundation is to support research to improve the lives of young people, ages 5 to 25 in the United States. And within that broad mission, we have two areas of focus. One is on reducing inequality in youth outcomes, and the second is on improving the use of evidence from research in policies and practices that affect young people. So you can see why this is an appropriate topic for today. When we say evidence use, what do we mean? You can think about evidence use in different ways. One of the most common ways of thinking about evidence use is the instrumental use of evidence. I have a decision to make. What should I do? Let's see what the research says. But it turns out that instrumental use of evidence is more complicated than simply saying, oh, let's see what the research says about the evidence use, because decisions have many sources. They're affected by local data, by the wisdom of experience, by professional judgments, by politics, by values, by scarce resources, by preferences of staff and clients. And it's never just one decision, it's multiple decisions. So understanding the use of research, even in its most straightforward instrumental manner, is still a complex process. But there are other ways that evidence can be used, and another important one is what we call the conceptual use of evidence. This is where evidence is brought to bear not on answering a specific question, but on helping us understand the challenges we face more deeply and identifying a range of responses without pointing to one in particular. So that's the conceptual use of evidence. Now, initial ideas or early ideas about evidence use focused on building a bridge between research and practice. And the idea was, how do you get the research over to the practice side? It was very much a one-way conception. We researchers figure stuff out, and then our job is to tell the practitioners. That's the dissemination model. Remember, that's the one I said does not work. But that was the initial conception. And so if you wanted research to influence practice, according to this idea, then the research had to be rigorous because it needed to have conclusions that were reliable enough to be worth paying attention to. It had to be timely. You know, you couldn't answer yesterday's questions with today's research. That wouldn't get your research used. And it needed to be accessible. You need to explain the findings in clear language that doesn't use a lot of jargon so that anybody could understand it. And you need to spread the research out. So that was the conception of getting evidence use that was most prevalent when the William T. Grant Foundation started supporting research on research use. And I would say in many areas of education, that is still the dominant conception of how you get evidence use. For example, in the United States, we have something called the What Works Clearinghouse. It is a repository for evidence about programs and practices in education that have certain effects. And the idea is that if a practitioner wants to improve 8th grade mathematics, they go to the What Works Clearinghouse and they say, which program improves 8th grade mathematics? Okay, I'll pick that one for my district. That rarely leads from research to practice because, in fact, it's not such a one-way transfer of knowledge. Because now we understand that conditions for use is a two-way process involving not only rigorous, timely, and accessible evidence, but also evidence that's relevant to the problems and practitioners. And how do we know? We have to talk with the practitioners. We have to establish connections with practitioners to know what questions they have. It's a matter of engagement. It's a matter of capacity. Practitioners are very busy. I don't have to tell the people in this room. You have a lot going on. You don't have time to read the research, let alone try to translate and put the research into practice. So there are capacity challenges. How do we build the absorptive capacity, the capacity of practitioners and policymakers to absorb information and craft it for their own purposes? So it's about establishing relationships between the producers of research and the consumers of research and the intermediaries, those who help make those connections. Because evidence use, it turns out, is a social process. Getting evidence used is often conceived as a one-way street, but success is more likely when the approach goes both ways. And intermediary organizations, organizations that help create those connections, could be advocates, could be brokers of information, could be think tanks, lots of intermediaries. Sometimes a research practice partnership itself is an intermediary. And we need structures then to support those relationships. In this way, the research gains a deeper understanding of the needs of policy and practice, and trust between the researcher and decision maker increases the chances of evidence use. So a research practice partnership is an ongoing, sustained relationship between researchers and practitioners where the research pursued is jointly constructed through conversations between the researcher and the practitioner, and the evidence produced is valuable for decision-making on the side of practitioners. So these are advantageous for researchers because they facilitate understanding of the local context. They provide opportunities to learn about local needs and questions. And if you want to produce research that gets used, you might want to produce research that responds to local needs and questions. And for researchers, the partnership provides insights that then facilitate new research. For policymakers and practitioners, the research practice partnership is valuable because, first of all, the researcher that's in this partnership can help provide access to existing knowledge, because the practitioner needs not only knowledge that's produced in its local context, but broader information. The researcher can help facilitate that. The practitioner has the opportunity to contribute to research that's relevant to their own context and to receive assistance with efforts to use that research. At the William T. Grant Foundation, we have a variety of resources that can help you if you're interested in pursuing research practice partnerships. These 3 papers, which you'll find on our website in particular, the one on the left side was the kind of spark plug for a lot of thinking about research practice partnerships by Cynthia Coburn and colleagues. The one on the right side is an updating of that by Caitlin Farrell and colleagues, the state of the field with research practice partnerships. And the one in the middle is about research practice partnerships in mental health services. And in fact, we have a whole website devoted to this, rpp.wtgrantfoundation.org, which is all about providing you with tools to build and sustain research practice partnerships. It addresses the topics that you see on this slide: structuring a partnership, using research, creating a memorandum of understanding, and so forth. And in the United States, education research practice partnerships are very popular right now. There are over 50 of them across the United States, either between a university and a local school district, or between a university and a state department of education. And there is an organization that's a national network of education practice partnerships that runs an annual conference and has a lot of resources for partnerships. If we want to get our evidence used and we want to pursue it in partnerships, then we have to change the way we work. We, as researchers, need to change the way we work. We need to make sure that decision makers' voices are reflected in our research agendas. We need to engage partners who can help make sense of the research for the local context, and we need to build sustained and trusting relationships, because those are the keys to unlocking evidence use. And we can help establish organizational routines that create opportunities for learning. You know, if we want evidence to be used within partnerships, then we need to build routines within our education service organizations, whether it's schools or local areas, or the national government. We need to establish routines that create opportunities for the staff to learn about research and research findings. Now, I'm going to give you 3 examples of research on the use of research evidence. 3 examples that back up the generalizations that I've been providing you. The first is a story told in a book called The Make or Break Year by Emily Phillips, who now works for the Spencer Foundation, but at the time the story was told, she was working for something called the Chicago Consortium for School Research, which is a consortium of universities working with the Chicago Public Schools. And so this is the most long-standing and most famous research practice partnership in the United States. Within this partnership, the staff of the school district identified a major problem, which is young people would enter 9th grade and not succeed in their coursework. They would fall behind. By the time of the next school year, they hadn't accumulated enough credits to move on to the 10th grade. They would fall further and further behind. Eventually, they would drop out of high school and not complete high school. So this was the problem they identified. And the researchers were able to identify predictors of early failure. That is, they would take information from the first semester of 9th grade and say, a student who has this profile is very likely to not accumulate enough credits to succeed. And so they built an early warning system. And with this system of indicators, school district staff were then able to develop interventions that responded to the early warnings and to target them to the students who were identified as likely to not succeed in 9th grade. And then the university researchers evaluated the impact of the intervention. And as you can read in the make or break year, this had dramatic effects on not only completion of 9th grade, but completion of high school in the Chicago schools. It went from one of the least successful school districts in the country to a much greater level of success where it is today. This is an example of evidence use in a local context. The second example has to do with evidence use in a national context. It is about getting the US Congress to use research in new laws. Now you might think, that's impossible. No one could do that. But in fact, Max Crowley, a prevention scientist at Penn State University, and his colleagues have created something called the Research to Policy Collaboration. Oh, there we go, fixed. In the research to policy collaboration, the researchers and staff members who work for U.S. congressmen are randomized to treatment and control groups. So it's double randomization. The researchers are randomized and the congressional staff are randomized. The treatment is a structured interaction in which the researcher provides information on legislative issues relating to child maltreatment. And so that's the treatment. And for the congressional staff in the control group, they get a brochure, but no relationship. And for the researchers in the control group, they get nothing. And so as a result of the treatment, compared to the control group, the researchers reported in this article that's cited at the bottom of the slide that there was increased evidence use in legislative deliberations, and not only that, there was increased mention of research in the laws themselves. And meanwhile, the researchers were also affected as they gained increased understanding of the policy process. So this shows how creating an opportunity for interaction between researchers and staff and building a relationship between them resulted in greater evidence use in the legislative process. The third example that I'm going to give you is from an effort to bring research to bear in the delivery of mental health services to adolescents. It's called the Coordinated Knowledge System. It's a comprehensive, computer-based system of information about how mental health providers should respond to the challenge of getting the adolescents to participate in their therapy sessions. Because if you know anything about mental health services for adolescents, you know the biggest problem is getting the young people to show up for their therapy sessions. So how can we solve that problem? So the usual way this is done is you got a series of steps that you can be taken to try to promote engagement, but the coordinated knowledge system is responsive to the specific needs of the individual and the specific context, and so it tries to pinpoint, it tries to target the therapeutic moves to the particular situation in a more evidence-based way. Supervisors of school-based mental health providers were randomized to treatment and control. The treatment is a sophisticated evidence based on ways to engage adolescents in their mental health services. The results showed, in fact, that those who were supervised by the supervisors were randomized to the treatment did indeed use evidence-based in their treatment strategies, and today the youth outcomes themselves. So now the researchers are looking at whether the youth actually improved their mental health status as a result of being exposed to more evidence-based treatments. So from these three examples, these three examples illustrate three different approaches to getting research evidence used. The education research practice partnership example, the make or break year example, that's a partnership approach where you establish a set of relationships and then you find out what problems need to be investigated, you investigate the problems and then you devise some strategies and then you evaluate them. That's the partnership approach. The second I would call a brokering approach where as a third party you bring the producers and researchers together, create some kind of structure that sustains their relationships and watch the information flow in both directions. And the third, and that was the research policy collaboration example, and the third I would call a tools and training approach where you build some body of evidence and a tool for accessing that evidence and then train people in how to use it, and that was the coordinated knowledge system example. So three approaches to getting evidence used. But a challenge in promoting this kind of activities by researchers is that universities are not typically set up to support this kind of engaged scholarship. University researchers, despite the power of partnerships, most social science units in universities are not designed to support them. In medicine and engineering, by contrast, faculty are rewarded for tech transfer, that is for coming up with inventions that transfer over to technology companies and then get adopted on our cell phones. There's a great reward for that if you're an engineering professor or a biomedical researcher. But in social sciences and education, policy relevant is often met with disdain. It is time for this to change. University researchers are typically rewarded for contributions to their academic fields. They're generating knowledge for their own sake. And that is demonstrated in the articles they publish and in the books they disseminate. And typically, universities offer little incentive for social impact within their social science units and in education. Rigor and relevance are often cast in opposition to one another as if rigorous research is not relevant to practice, and research that's relevant to practice is haphazard and not rigorous. But that's a false dichotomy. In fact, research benefits from engagement with the problems of the real world, and I would argue research is only relevant, we should only care about it, if it is also rigorous. At the William T. Grant Foundation, we've started something called the Institutional Challenge Grant, which combines our focus on reducing inequality and draws lessons from the findings of researchers in our use of evidence field. This grant calls on universities to build a partnership with a public agency or a private nonprofit to jointly develop a research agenda to reduce inequality in youth outcomes, and to build the capacity of the agency to use evidence in the decision-making, and at the same time, reshaping incentives within the university for faculty to pursue community-engaged scholarship. So what research is being examined in these research practice partnerships? Reducing inequality in early literacy, evaluating a school leadership program to help improve outcomes for low-income minority youth, disrupting inequality in the pathway from school to college and career, addressing chronic absenteeism in city high schools. We've made 20 of these awards so far in the 7 years that the grant has existed, and about half of them are in the area of education. And for all of them, it's a 5-year process to build capacity to use research evidence and to build incentives for university faculty to address local challenges. Now, how are some of these universities creating these incentives for faculty members? Well, some provide teaching releases for faculty who participate in partnerships. Some provide summer salary for faculty who collaborate with external partners on research. Some are reconsidering how research contributions are judged in career advancement decisions. You know, in the universities we work with, the first thing anybody wants to talk about is tenure and promotion. Oh, are you going to evaluate community-engaged scholarship in your tenure decisions? Oh, that would be terrible because we have to, the prestige of our university depends on publishing in prestigious academic journals. Well, the first thing to say is this is not only about tenure and promotion. There are many ways that universities can show how they value community-engaged scholarship. But at the same time, there are things we should be thinking about in our tenure and promotion process. Perhaps the most important is, researchers are evaluated for their contributions to teaching, research, and service. Well, I'm not sure about Ben-Gurion University, but in the university that I came from, there are 3 categories, and only one of them really counts. And so the most important thing we can do in evaluating community-engaged research is if it involves knowledge production, it should be counted as research. Because what typically happens is we say, oh, that's service. It gets marginalized, and it doesn't really matter in any consequential decision. So if it involves knowledge production, it's research. Doesn't matter if the purpose of the knowledge production is to influence other research, or if the purpose of the knowledge production is to improve real people's lives. It's research, either way, if it involves knowledge production. And we can obtain measures of the contribution of applied research. Right now, we judge the contribution of academically oriented research by seeing whether it's cited by other researchers. Well, we could count up whether community-engaged research is mentioned in the news media or figures in legislative or other kinds of public deliberations. And we can, now we're working on a tenure case, we solicit letters, testimonials. This person's research was transformative because other people now take it into account when they do research. Well, why couldn't we get letters from policymakers that say, this research was transformative, I used to enact this policy, now I enact this policy. Or I used to teach in this way, now I teach in this way. Same thing. I think it's arbitrary that we currently reward research if it contributes to other research, and we don't reward research if it helps change the world. Why not reward contributions to the public good? Research on evidence use is increasing, and we're coming to have better understanding of the conditions that it takes to get research used. This is a recent essay by my colleague Kim Dumont, which describes what we've learned about conditions that support research use. Once again, you can find it on the website of the William T. Grant Foundation. It's on the homepage. So we need to nurture research use by supporting the quality and structure of relationships. We need to create organizational routines in which research use is just part of the day-to-day work of doing business. We need to think about the underlying conditions of research use, particularly what counts as evidence and who gets to define what counts as evidence. Research on research use must attend to the conditions at each level. As I mentioned at the William T. Grant Foundation, we do support research on research use, the science of knowledge utilization. We hope to see that field growing. And indeed, there's an international organization called the Transforming Evidence Network that supports research on research use on a worldwide basis and in domains that go beyond our own interests in youth policies. Oh, Transforming Evidence, there it is. There's also increasing funding from the U.S. government for research on research use. The U.S. National Science Foundation is funding research on the use, usefulness, and impact of research. The National Institute of Justice recently announced a program of funding to support strategies to increase the use of evidence-based policies and practices. And as Yarif mentioned in his introduction, I chaired a committee that produced this report about the future of education research at the Institute of Education Sciences, which is the research arm of the U.S. Department of Education, and we called for research on knowledge mobilization. So to wrap up, research is more likely to be used in the context of relationships between producers and consumers of research, of evidence. A research practice partnership is a prominent strategy to generate evidence use. Collaborating with a trusted intermediary is another proven strategy. And other approaches that build relationships may also succeed. But university faculty will need to become engaged in responding to real-world problems, and universities can help promote this process by reorganizing their incentives. This is not in any way to diminish or change or end internationally renowned studies that are driven by theory. Instead, it is to enhance the visibility of work that meets the challenges of today. Universities have this power to change. Thank you.